Welcome back to this part of our DTS revamping series. Today we're going to be replacing the rear air suspension. We've got a kit from Arnault Suspensions. They offer these because Cadillac does not make the original parts for these anymore, so you have to go with aftermarket static suspension. The original ones on this DTS were part of the continuously varying road sensing suspension system they used to make, and there is a valve back here that actually varies the stiffness of the suspension depending on the road conditions, etc. We can't buy that anymore. Even if we could, it would be way too expensive. So this kit from Arnault Suspensions is actually very good. I've used it on other cars before as well. It works just as well. You won't even notice the difference. Alright, so let's get started. First thing we got to do is remove a whole bunch of stuff from the trunk just so we can get to the bolts for the top of the shocks. Alright, so our next step here is we got to get to the top of the shock on each side of the trunk here. So there's a rubber mount that isolates the shock, and it's underneath the covers here on either side. So we have to do a couple of steps in the trunk here in order to clear all the stuff out of the way so we can take those two panels out. Alright, so we got our cargo net out of the way. Now what we got to do is what holds the cargo net in are these little plastic screws right here, and there's two more just like it on the other side, so we got to just loosen them with your hand. You don't need any wrench or anything. They're very easy to take out. They just screw onto a little stud that sticks out. We have to remove this one, like so, and this one. That loosens this piece. Now there's another clip. You see it right here. If you've been under the hood of these 2000s Cadillacs, you'll see these all over the place. They're just a little plastic rivet. Alright, so go in here. This has to come up a little bit further, and then you can get underneath it. If you've never seen these before. Don't want to break it. There it is. It's a very simple, stupid clip. Alright, so the next step is we got all of our screws and everything out on these sides. There are a couple of little clips that hold it to the body here. I think there's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm pretty sure the factory gives you these little holes in the thing here just to be able to pull it up and loosen it. Once you get it off of here, you just kind of work your way over. Threads here, there you go. So if you look at this piece of plastic, you got these 4 little clips here. And they made up with 4 slots on the body, and that's all that just holds it in. Our next step here is we got to remove this carpeting from the top, from the underneath the deck lid here. It covers up the subwoofer and the amplifier and a few other things. There's 5 of these plastic clips that hold this thing on the top here. There should be a little square piece on top of this for the instruction plate to open your pass-through, but this one's busted off. Just be careful when you take this off that you don't bust this off. We're going to use just our normal trim puller tool, and we're just going to get nicely under these things. Just do it nice and slow so you don't damage anything. Pop them out. Alright, so continuing down the line, we'll just pull the rest of these out. Okay, now we have to be careful here again because one clip holds 2 of these together. Now that we've got all the clips out of here, we've noticed that there are 4 that are one size and a 5th that's a different size. And that 5th one goes right here, and that's the smaller one. So we want to keep track of that, make sure that we put them back in the same order and everything fits right. Once we get the clips out of the front, we got 2 clips back here, one on either side of this pass-through, that we got to pull out so that we can take this entire piece here and fold it like nicely flat on the floor. So we'll take these out. Okay, so next step, once we got our 2 clips out of the pass-through there, is we can basically take this entire piece out. Now be careful when you remove it, because if there is that little piece here, you'll just have to push this in slightly to get it out. This one doesn't have it, obviously, so we can just take it out. Just pull it down. Get it out of here without ripping anything. Alright, I'm just going to take it out because I don't want to crush it while I'm in there. So I thought that we should be able to just take these side curtains out without having to remove the floor, but it turns out it's much easier if you just take the entire carpeting out. So that's what we're going to do. First thing we got to do is just pull this spare tire cover out of here. Alright, next step is we just got to remove the spare tire is one thing. There's a wing nut here, plastic wing nut. Take it out. Alright, now these are actually screws. They're well, plastic bolts, I guess. They just very easily loosen. Take them out. So next step, we got all of these guys removed, 4 of them, 2 on each side. So now the whole trunk carpeting is loose, and we just have to come in here and just kind of finagle its way out of the trunk. Tuck this up in here, take it out. Alright, so you may have noticed this door in the floor here of the trunk. That's actually to access the fuel pump and the sender unit. So if you ever have to change either one, the fuel pump or the sender, you got those 5 bolts, you take that off and you can get right to the fuel pump. Okay, next step, we're going to take this side out. You can see the back is nice and loose because it's not being held in by the trunk floor anymore. This guy, we just want to very carefully pull him back around the hinge of the trunk lid. And that'll allow us to slip that by. There's a couple of little things you got to be careful of. There's the 2 little studs that stick out here. There's some like body seam sealant up here that kind of gets in the way of taking this out. But just kind of get your fingers up in here, pop this out gently. Alright. Take this out of the way. We're basically going to do the same thing we did on that side over here. I'll pull this out of the way. Get that out over the hinge. Again, some seam sealer, because they love to just spew it everywhere. Alright, so that's loose. Now there's a slot cut in this that we can just slip that guy through. And just come out. Alright, there we go. So what we're looking for is actually right here. That's the top of our air shock. So this is just a cover they put on it to keep it, you know, anything out of there so bolts don't rust. Just got to pull that off. Then here's our 2 bolts that hold this in. Alright, now that we're done with the trunk, we're going to proceed to under the car here to remove this shock absorber. The first thing we got to do is actually remove the air line up here. When you're pulling this off, you got to be real careful because unless you bought another kit of airlines, you got to reuse this. So you can see here this little clip, it's out of the way. I just like to put a screwdriver under here and just kind of wriggle it a little bit. I get it in here. Alright, now, I mean, you can see how rusty that is. And the fact that no air came out meant that this shock is just done. So it's a good thing we're changing it. Alright, so next step, we want to go ahead and remove this electrical connector here. It's fairly easy. You just pop that clip off and just wriggle it out. Now, this is the line to the shock. There's actually a clip underneath as part of this connector that's like clipping it to the suspension arm. We just want to get our puller tool under here and basically just kind of wriggle this guy out. There we go. Okay, now that we got the connector loose here, we just want to go ahead and cut these zip ties. Make sure you have a couple more handy, just small ones. I don't want to pull, you can see there's a little plastic piece here. I don't generally want to pull these out because they're going to break and then you're going to have nothing to zip tie to. Alright, so to remove the lower half of the shock, we have 2 bolts. One here, they're both 10mm. They're about that long, so it'll take a little while to get them out. We have one of these electric ratchets, so that should... Alright, next part, I'm going going to push up on this shock here just to compress it a little bit. Okay. That lets us get it out of there pretty easily. Okay, so we're back in the trunk. What I didn't realize was that the shock is actually just a single point that comes up. There's this little metal cup. The shock actually has a T27 on the top of it, and there's a 15mm nut that holds that on. So what I'm going to do is use this to stop the shaft from spinning and the wrench to actually loosen it. Okay, so I've gotten it to the point where I can just hold it with the ratchet and just kind of turn it. Alright, basically holding on by like one thread. Okay. So here we have the nut and the cup. And then we have these two nuts, so we got to remove this mount here. We're going to replace this as well while we're at it. So I'm just going to take these bolts off. Alright, so I just wanted to show you guys the two different shocks here. This is the new one from Arnault suspension. This is the old one, GM adjustable suspension shock. The difference between the two is that this has got the sort of cup molded into the top of the shock here that will fit the mount perfectly when you put it on there, whereas the other one is a bit more aggressive. So they came up with this spacer that goes down on top of it like this, and that fits in the mount like that, right? So it spreads out the weight, and then what you do is up in the trunk you throw that on top and you put the nut down on here and you hold on this, some vice grips or whatever, and you tighten this and you're good. Unfortunately, in the actual kit and the instructions from Arnault, they don't really tell you how any of this is supposed to work. So that's how it is, just like this. Alright, next thing you want to do is migrate these nuts over from the old one to this new shock, so you can put the bolts in it once you're done with the top. Okay, so got our two nuts tightened for the upper shock mount here. Next step is to actually insert the new shock in from below. We'll put our new isolator on there. We have a nut from the kit because it's a different size than the original factory nut. And then we'll tighten it all up and we should be good. Alright, so here we go. I'm going to put it in. Make sure your air fitting is facing rearward. And we're just going to throw it up in here, like so. My assistant in the trunk is going to do up the bolt up there. Okay, so what we did to actually tighten this center nut up here is we used the brap gun here, and we just threw it on there and gave it a couple of braps, and it's on there pretty tight now. I was trying to hold it with the vice grips and tighten it with the wrench, and I just gave up on that, so that's what we ended up doing, and it worked. So hey, there you go. We've pulled the shock down here. We've got our two bolts in the little captive nuts here, and we're ready to basically just tighten it up. So here we go. So the kit comes with these sensors. Well, they're really just a coil that tricks the computer into thinking that the shock is still connected. So what we're going to do is, the kit comes with some self-tapping screws that you can like drill holes in the body and then mount it to the side somewhere. I don't really want to do that, So what I'm going to do is mount this thing to the lower control arm using the studs from the shock and one of the old nuts from the upper mount, because it's the same thread pitch. So in order to do that though, these are 1/4 inch holes and I just have to make them larger, up to 5/16, and then we can mount it to the lower control arm. As you can see, what we're doing is we're using this bolt here for the left side of the control arm mount to hold this right nicely in here, and then we're going to use some zip ties to attach this cable. As you can see, we finished up on this side, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Then after we're done, we'll fire it up, well, fire up the compressor, make sure everything holds air, make sure the rear end levels properly, and then we'll be done. Alright, so we've finished all of our testing. As you can see, the ride height's pretty good right here. There's no leaks, so we'll see you next time.